So, is there anyone here who has ever been able to spend the night on the USS Hornet? He's rolling his eyes. Okay, so a couple of us have had this experience. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, the USS Hornet is a World War II aircraft carrier, and it's been permanently docked since it was decommissioned in 1970 in Alameda at the Naval Air Base there, and it serves as a kind of floating museum. The other thing that the USS Hornet does is it welcomes scout troops and Y Guides groups and school groups to spend the night on this aircraft carrier. It's kind of cool, you know, you get to eat in the crew mess, you get to see all the different areas like the bridge and, you know, all that stuff, and you get to sleep in the real bunk rooms with the hammocks and stuff. It's actually pretty cool. And when it's bedtime, there's ghost stories.
Yep.
Yes. They bring everybody right up to the front of the, I don't know, is that the hull? Is that the right word for that?
The bow.
The bow. Okay, they bring everybody, I'm not a boat person, but they bring everybody up to the bow of the boat. And the children, they're kind of wiggling in it with excitement because they've been running all over this aircraft carrier for hours by this point. And then somebody turns off the lights. And they start telling ghost stories. You know what they sound like, but these ones, they're all about sailors, and they use the spooky voice. And then, clang! All of a sudden there's this bang coming from what sounds like the side of the ship. And the kids, oh, their eyes go big. They are so rattled and unsure about what's going on. And you can see the questions in their eyes. Was that a real ghost? It's pretty cool. Now, I have to say it was never going to be easy to get those kids bunked down. But after that, it's pretty much impossible. So we might think that that's kind of what's going on in our gospel story today. Because here's the disciples. They're all gathered together in, you know, the proverbial upstairs room that we've been hearing about in the Gospels. It's probably dim. There's only one little oil lamp on the middle of the table. And two of their number have just hurried back after meeting a mysterious traveler on the road to Emmaus. And they're saying, it was Jesus. We saw him. He's alive. Now, you can just imagine the excitement in that room. Because, you know, was it really Jesus that they had met? And what does that mean? And then all of a sudden, Jesus is right there with them. Only instead of, you know, a clang on the side of the wall or, you know, a bang from under the table, all of that usual ghosty stuff, Jesus just stands there and he says, peace be with you. He's kind of trying to calm things down, don't you think? But doesn't work. All chaos kind of breaks loose because they're thinking, and they, you know, their eyes are probably as wide as the ones that you see on those kids when you're hearing those ghost stories. They're scared. Their thoughts are looking for a rational explanation to what is happening. And for them, the rational explanation is Jesus must be a ghost. And the thing is, it is the most rational explanation from their perspective. That's because unlike today, the existence of ghosts was assumed to be a fact by most people in Jesus' time. Educated and uneducated alike thought that the spirit world was absolutely real. And it's underlied all kinds of things that we experience in the world. Things like illnesses and mental health crises, even emotions, which in some cultures, particularly Jewish culture, were located in your head. Even emotions were said to be influenced and brought about through the spirits. Many cultures felt that what happened to people after death was that they moved into some sort of spiritual realm. Some called it an underworld or an afterlife or a higher spiritual plane of existence, but it was just plain general understanding. So, unlike those kids of the USS Hornet, ghosts were real to those disciples gathered here after Jesus' death. For them, the thing that was unbelievable and pretty much irrational, and the thing that they don't even consider at first, is that a person might be able to return after death in bodily form. They can't figure out why it is that someone could interact like a living person, be touched like a living person, eat like a living person. Now, there was belief in a bodily resurrection. It's kind of trendy, actually, in Jesus' time in some Jewish communities of that day. But it was still sought as kind of a future age thing. And it's pretty clear that that is not what the disciples were expecting around that table. Even though Jesus had dropped the odd clue, we have to admit, when we go back and read the Gospels, that he was going to come back. Also trendy in Jesus' time was a belief that the physical world was in fact a problem. And the spiritual world was this ideal realm that perfected everything that was wrong with the physical world. That belief was especially trendy in all of those cosmopolitan cities across the Mediterranean that were influenced by Greek philosophy and filled with people from every corner of the known world, including lots and lots of Jewish communities. So whichever view the disciples in that room subscribed to, they were not looking at this encounter like we might today. See, we can't not ask the kinds of questions that scientific thinking taught us to ask. For us, is it real? Means, can I observe it with my physical senses, and can I measure it and record it? And does it follow patterns that I can explain by referring to the behavior of other things that I know to be real? Even, I have to admit, the most imaginative of children on that aircraft carrier started from the perspective that ghosts, they probably didn't exist. That's why it's so much fun for them, right? But for these disciples, the fact that they can touch Jesus and eat with Jesus means one thing. Jesus is not what they thought, not a ghost. Real or not real, it didn't really come into the question. Jesus was real. Jesus not a ghost? That's pretty unexpected for them. And they weren't quite sure what this meant yet. They didn't quite get yet. They're still trying to figure it out. How can Jesus, with a resurrected body, move between the material and the spiritual world? Because, he's been there, he's disappeared a couple of times. But the fact that Jesus is standing in front of them in physical form is telling them something important and new about the relationship between the material and the spiritual. To them, Jesus' resurrection is a blessing upon our tangible world, the one that we as human beings live in every day. It's telling them that that world is not irreparably damaged or broken or alienated from the spiritual world, as people might think. It's also telling them that Jesus is right there with them to let them know that, just like in their scriptures of old, God is still active in the here and the now. Jesus had told them when they were alive all kinds of things that were pointing towards this. God loves you, and you can know God through me. So if Jesus is somehow alive, even though he died, then that must all be true. They can still know God through Jesus, and they can still be children of God. It's also telling them that God cannot just be found in one place, a place that's closely guarded by priests and arcane rituals. Because here they are, sitting around a table, meeting God in this everyday act of sharing fish. And they can meet God every time that they do that, sit down at a table. I mean, we do that. We sit down at a table here and we meet God. But we also meet God when we sit down at a table with our families, or, have a picnic on a hillside, or any number of places and ways that we sit down and have meals. So back to the USS Hornet. I will bet that most every kid who has spent the night on the Hornet says that the ghost stories were their favorite part. Greg's shaking his head. Julie, you've been, right? Yeah. Marcus is trying to block it out from his memories. I think Matthew kind of feels that way a bit too. He had to go like 4 times. But you know what? I only had to go twice. And for me, my favorite part was when we went up on the flight deck. Thing is, it's late in the evening. It's pitch black out there on the port, on the bay, and because it's Alameda, it's pretty much always completely enshrouded in fog. I have never been there when it was a clear night and we could see the stars. And the other thing is there's no railings on that flight deck, so you can't launch I know you're like, ooh, but you can't launch an airplane if there's a railing in the way. It's a problem. And they have the slingshots. It's pretty cool. But it's also pretty daunting. And there's the amazing thing is that there's docents there who were veterans that served on aircraft carriers, just like that one. And they tell us all kinds of stories. Stories about the friends that they remember and they lost in wartime, and stories about when they retrieved lunar capsules out of the oceans in the midst of the space race. And many of these veterans related tales to us of their own near misses, the time when they nearly didn't return. And they professed to us an unshakable belief that it was by the grace of God that they themselves made it home. As far as I was concerned, those were the real ghost stories. Because here were people long gone and people old enough to be the great grandparents of the kids that we had brought on board this ship. And they were connecting with us and telling us something that matters, that was true, and that is real. Even when you feel alone, on the deck of an aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean, in the most precarious and God-forsaken of times, we're not alone. And God has not forsaken us or this world. So, is the risen Jesus real? And if so, what does it mean? Now, I'm guessing that most of us are here today because we do assume the reality of some sort of spiritual world. But we might also need to get out of our scientific and fact-driven brains a bit more so that we can think about what that question is asking of us today. Because the risen Jesus is so much more than some sort of ghost or spirit out there disobeying our settled understanding of the laws of physics. And we do not have to wait for some sort of perfect and heavenly afterlife, because you know what? God's reign is here in the material world. Everywhere we touch, everything we taste, everyone that we can meet and speak with. In fact, we meet Jesus every time that we sit together at a meal, and we touch Jesus every time that we connect with another person in love or caring. And we see Jesus among us every time that we reach out with hands of peace and sanctuary in places of conflict and violence. So, just like those disciples, it's okay if we are in this with a sense that mixes up our joy and our disbelief every time that we have that kind of experience, and we're reminded, oh, that was a Jesus moment, right? Jesus' hands are out there for us to touch, and his body is present to us in all kinds of surprising ways. So I think the challenge to us when we face that question, is the risen Jesus real, and what does it mean? The challenge to us today is to allow our awareness of the resurrected Jesus to permeate our everyday, tangible, material reality with intentionality, to see it, to feel it, to know it, to make ourselves aware of it when it's happening. We can be open to the risen Jesus as part of our everyday lives, even in the most mundane of ways. Because God is here. God is a living, breathing part of everything that we are, and everything we see, and everything that we do. So peace be with us all. Amen.